Hey, freedom lovers, it's William Moore, and you are watching Beyond the Ties That Bind. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the program, and I hope everyone is having as good of a day as you can have right now. No, that is not the final intro for the show. I am still working on something that I hope to have out soon, which should be very professional looking, should be very slick. I have some good video editing software that I'm using, and I hope to be able to bring you a really good intro for the show soon. However, I am so stoked about being able to use the song. Rob Lundgren gave me permission to use his version of the song Ties That Bind, which is a cover of the Ultra Bridge song Ties That Bind, which I took the name for this program from. So that's why I threw together something really quick so I could have an intro now using that music. Today's edition, we are going to talk about something that I spoke of just in one of the last episodes of the program, titled Constitutional Crisis. And a lot of people are probably going, oh no, this again. Well, it's an important topic, and I do not want people associating the word freedom with that document known as the United States Constitution. We are all brainwashed from an early age. In the government indoctrination centers known as public schools, even some private schools, even some homeschool curriculums, and the religious indoctrination centers known as churches. We are brainwashed by the media, in universities, even films that people watch. You're brainwashed to believe that the Constitution is something good, virtuous, valuable. That we hear over and over that the Constitution protects individual freedoms and restrains government. Well, it's just the opposite. And I know you're probably getting tired of hearing this, but it's the facts. It's the truth. The truth of the matter is, the Constitution restrains personal freedom and protects the government, protects the functioning of the government, and allows them to do pretty much whatever they want to do. When you break through all the propaganda and are able to clearly see the truth about the government and the Constitution, then and only then will you truly be free. Now, think about this. I've had the opportunity to go to a lot of other countries. In those other countries, everyone believes that their government, their country, their governing document is the best. It's number one. We're number one. We're number one. You see it in sporting events, international sporting events, people all behind their team. And it's a sense of nationalism. And that's what it all boils down to. Brainwashed from an early age to believe that your country's the best, your government's the best, your governing document is better than all the rest. Go to Russia, most people there will agree that their country's the best, their government's the best, because they're brainwashed. There's a lot of propaganda that's being sold to them. And so the only way you can truly be free is to break away from that mindset. People have an allegiance to the Constitution in the freedom movement, and a lot of times they don't even realize that they have an allegiance to the Constitution, that they're defending the Constitution. They will admit that the Constitution's a flawed document, but they still have an allegiance. Because we'll watch different videos and there'll be a jackbooted thug with his foot on somebody's throat, and the person will point out, and this is not just one person, this is in a lot of different videos, the person will say, hey, Mr. Law Enforcement guy, you swore an oath to defend the Constitution from enemies foreign and domestic. Well, that's what he's doing according to the Constitution. He is defending the Constitution from, at that point in time, a domestic enemy. Because in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, it states that the government, the Congress, has the power to raise a militia to execute the laws of the Union to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. Suppress insurrections. That's enemies domestic. It goes back to Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shay, Massachusetts. It was a tax revolt. So they put suppress insurrections in there in case there was a revolt, in case there was a rebellion, in case a protest gets a little too violent. And those are your domestic enemies. It's not someone in the government that is practicing tyranny, that is despotic. No, it is the people within the country who rebel against the government. Those are your domestic enemies according to the Constitution and according to that oath. So when you have a jackbooted thug and he is beating somebody up because they broke a law of the land. And what is a law of the land? It's just an opinion of a man scribbled down on a piece of paper, passed by a legislature, and then it becomes law. And so if you break a law of the land, say you're not social distancing or you're not wearing a mask where you should be wearing a mask in a certain state where they mandate that you must wear a mask, well, you're breaking a law. And when he puts his boot on the throat of that person is who is considered the domestic enemy. Okay, not anybody in government. People who talk about the Constitution need to learn more about the Constitution before they talk about the Constitution. You know, true freedom doesn't require a piece of paper to defend it. True freedom doesn't need a government to secure an individual's rights. You don't need some corporate body of men over here to, secure your rights or protect your freedom. You are responsible for protecting your freedom. Freedom is defended by the heart, mind, and strength of the person who loves freedom. Patrick Henry had a quote, and it's an excellent quote. It was made back in 1789. Now, when he was speaking, and when he said these words, he was addressing the Virginia Ratifying Convention. And he was talking about the people he's talking about in this quote are the people who were proposing this new constitution, which was drafted behind closed doors in Philadelphia in 1787. He says, guard with jealous attention the public liberty. I like using freedom. But guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. When he says suspect everyone who approaches that jewel, he's talking about men like George Clymer, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington, who behind closed doors, a bunch of lawyers, bankers, and land speculators, drafted a governing document and pulled off a coup d'etat and overthrew the existing government and replaced it with the government that we have now that's been functioning since 1789. He says, guard with jealous attention the public liberty, suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined. They gave up that force, and we were ruined by the adoption of the Constitution. See, the country was being governed by the Articles of Confederation, which were not perfect, needed some tweaking, but they met and broke the laws of the Articles of Confederation to give us the United States Constitution. And in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Line 1, it says that they have the power to lay and collect taxes. Unlimited power to collect taxes, to lay and collect taxes. And then down, once again in Clause 15, it says that they can raise a militia, an army, law enforcement, to execute the laws of the Union. And then there's a proper and necessary clause, meaning that they can do whatever necessary to enforce these laws. So, a lot of people will say, well, what about the quotes from James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington that seem to be pro-freedom quotes? Well, they were Federalist. And a pro-freedom quote from a Federalist is about as good as a pro-life quote from an abortionist. Now, if an abortionist starts talking about the sanctity of life, like they are now during this virus, talking about the sanctity of life, people who believe it's okay to abort a baby are now talking about the sanctity of life, that we need to wear masks and gloves to protect the elderly. They care nothing about the elderly. It's all an agenda. But anyway, so when you have the Federalists making these types of quotes, it doesn't matter. They won. And the Federalists they met behind closed doors to draft that Constitution so they could control the country, so that they could control individuals. They were looking out for their own interest, economic interest. And they wanted to protect themselves. That's why they gave themselves the power to lay and collect taxes and then raise up a militia to protect themselves from any type of revolt like Shays' Rebellion, and to send that same militia out to collect the taxes. Like Patrick Henry said, you're going to have 2 sheriffs going around collecting taxes, the state sheriff and the federal sheriff. Now, Patrick Henry made the most passionate defense of individual freedom. Some of it contained, the defense of state freedom, but most of it was about individual freedom. And he was fearful of the government, which was being created at that time. So no government holds the interest of the individual at heart. No government whatsoever holds the interest of the individual at heart. Government is about the collective, the corporation. It has nothing to do with the individual or protecting the individual. And we've seen that all throughout the history of this country. And a lot of people will say, well, what we need to do is we need to get the country back to a point to where government fears the people, and then they go to that quote, which is erroneously attributed to Thomas Jefferson, says something like, when government fears the people, there is liberty, and when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. Well, let me ask this question. When has this government ever feared the people? I don't remember a time that this government has ever feared the people. Maybe 1861. But even then, Lincoln still continued to send troops into the South. So he didn't fear the people that much. He was willing to kill 600,000 people to suppress the insurrection of that time period. So I don't see the government being all that scared of the people, especially when they have that type of military force that they have nowadays. Somewhere and at all times throughout this country's history, someone's freedom is being trampled upon by government. You go back to, 1790. And one of the first acts of George Washington was to send an army into Ohio under the guise of fighting off Native American attacks upon the settlers there. That's not what was going on. He actually sent those troops in to kill people who were involved in the whiskey trade so that he could have a monopoly. They went to kill George Washington's competition so he could have a monopoly. Talk about your rights and your freedoms being trampled upon. And then, of course, with the taxation that was taking place, even with the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation. I mean, you had men who just fought in the war for independence. They gave their all for this war. And so the government turns around, pays them in worthless script, and then starts to tax them. And then the people try and pay those taxes in that worthless script, and the government says, no. We will only accept payment in silver and gold. And then they can't even trade that script for silver and gold. So what's the government do? They come and start confiscating the lands of these people who had put their lives on the line to fight in the war for independence. And you have just story after story after story about how this government, which was created by the Constitution, now oversees the Constitution, tramples upon freedoms and the rights of the individual. And it happened long before 1913. It happened long before 1871 when the United States government became a corporation of the crown. So this government exists to steal, kill, and destroy. And you cannot have true freedom when you place yourself under the authority of the Constitution. People say, well, what about the Bill of Rights, the amendments? The amendments mean nothing, because an amendment, if you look it up, is a change or addition or removal of something from a legal or statutory document. So you add something to that legal or statutory document, you change something in that legal or statutory document, or you remove something from that legal or statutory document, which they have done in the past. Look at prohibition. And then look at how they have passed amendments left and right, and they break their own laws to pass those amendments, such as the 16th Amendment with the income tax. And then you have, the 14th Amendment, which is an abomination altogether and a story for a different program. So we need to break this allegiance to the Constitution, because the Constitution is a worthless piece of paper. It's no good. It does not serve the people. Does not serve the people at all. Now, if you're going to sit here and argue with me, go back to my video, Constitutional Crisis. And you can also go back to my other videos on the Second Amendment and do some research before you try and give a rebuttal. And I highly recommend this book by Murray N. Rothbard, Conceived in Liberty, and this is The New Republic, 1784 to 1791, Conceived in Liberty. A very good book, and I do, really quick, once again, want to read from the back cover of this book. It was a bloodless coup d'etat against an unresisting Confederation Congress. The original structure of the new Constitution was now complete. The Federalist, by use of propaganda, chicanery, fraud, malapportionment of delegates, blackmail, threats of secession, and even coercive laws, coercive, that means threat of force, had managed to sustain enough delegates to defy the wishes of the majority of the American people and create a new constitution. These were lawyers, bankers, land speculators, and they defied the wishes of the majority of the people and brought forth a new constitution, a new form of government. The drive was managed by a core of brilliant members and representatives of the financial and landed oligarchy. These wealthy merchants and large landowners were joined by the urban artisans of the large cities in their drive to create a strong overriding central government. A supreme government with its own absolute power to tax, regulate commerce, and raise armies. These powers were sought eagerly as a method of handing out special privileges to commercial groups, navigation acts to subsidize shipping, tariffs to protect inefficient artisans stampeded by national depression from foreign manufactured goods, and a strong army and navy. But government by its nature cannot supply bounties and privileges without taking them from others, and these others were to be largely the hapless bulk of the country's citizens, our country's individuals. Citizen means you're a subject. I'm not a subject. I'm not a citizen. I am an individual, just like each and every one of you. Freedom is under attack. It's been under attack since 1787. Now, if you get this book, Conceived in Liberty, Volume 5, make sure that you get volumes 1 through 4. I said the other day it was $29.95, and it was, but the Mises Institute no longer carries it, so it's like $60 now. But it's worth every penny. Reading it takes you back to that time period. You can, curl up with a good book and you'll transport yourself back in time, back into the 1700s, and see how this country came to be and what was going on in the beginning of the country. But freedom is under attack, and we cannot use a document which whole purpose was to enslave. to spread the message of freedom. The Constitution is not a freedom document. And the Congress has so much power in the Constitution, and the Constitution is not the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is the articles, clauses, or the articles, sections, and clauses before you even get to the Bill of Rights. And then, what did we have? George Washington sent a letter with the Constitution to people, and he talked about rights that needed to be surrendered. Individuals needing to give up a certain amount of liberty. Why? For safety and security. They've been pushing that rhetoric for a long time, people. They're pushing it on us right now. But it's nothing new, because they were pushing it back in the 1700s, 1787 to 1789 to be exact, in order to bring about a new form of government which would have the power of unlimited taxation and the power to raise up an army to coerce people into paying those taxes. This is William Moore for Beyond the Ties That Bind. Until next time, everyone, peace.